Hello. So I'm going through everything that surfaced during the court case where the government were defending their policy to add VAT onto private education. And Lord Panic was acting for the claimant, saying it was violating human rights. And what's really interesting is obviously the case, but what's come out subsequently and the information that we now know that the government had and have had all along, which for many people is not going to come as a surprise. For many people, it's a bit of a ooh, but I've been arguing against that, and it turns out that was true. And for a lot of parents, it's that bit where your jaw's on the floor. You can't actually believe what you're hearing. And I'm going to share a lot of that now. By the way, thank you for subscribing. Please do keep subscribing because it helps the message get out there. And hang around till the end because this is a meaty one. We've got a lot to get through on this. So it all surrounds what has been put together by the Financial Times have amalgamated this, and their article is, I'll put it in the comments section, have a look at it. And it's all stuff that we have been saying over many, many months. But effectively, when private parents, the private lobbyists, as Bridget wanted to call us, when they were saying, this is outrageous, why are you doing it now? We had no answer. We had no answer as to why this wasn't being imposed in September 2025, which was what they said in their manifesto. But why was it being rushed through for January 2025? And the simple answer was, as we now know, they wanted more money. Now, the bit with that, we knew that was going to be a thing. We knew that they were going to go for more money. What we didn't know publicly was the fact that Rachel Reeves had been warned about what this would do. So she was given scenarios as to what would happen when she imposed this VAT at different times. And in her briefing, and this is all evidence. So before anyone says, where are the facts? This was all presented in court. So this is evidence by the government. This is the government's own evidence and admission. And the government said that they had given the different scenarios, and the most disruptive scenario, their title, not mine, the most disruptive scenario was a start date of January 2025. And the least disruptive scenario was August, September 2025. So Rachel Reeves was told that this was going to be the most disruptive. And the interesting bit here, again, is we have a lot of people saying, oh, you know, private school parents, stop whinging, just go and pay your tax. And I've personally been saying this isn't just about private schools, this is about state schools. Please don't see this as just the umbrella of we're only fighting for private schools. Because, of course, that would be stupid because for so many people, they were coming out of private school to go into state school. So why would they not try and support a system that they were about to be in? So this was never, as far as the private lobbyists were concerned, this was never them against us. This was we're all in this together. And to back this up, we have officials who told the Chancellor that the Department for Education itself has noted that it may be less disruptive for schools and parents if the changes took place from August 2025. Now, the important thing to remember here is the Department for Education isn't the Department for Private School Education. It's the Department for State Education. So the Department for Education here, when they talk about schools, they're not talking about private schools, they're talking about state schools. So what they're saying is they're recognising that there will be huge disruption to the state system if it's implemented in January. It would be better if it was implemented in August or September, but Rachel Reeves ignored it. And the reason that she ignored it was the revenue. Now, there's figures all over the place about what this was supposed to earn, what it is going to earn, you know, who said what here, when, and why. But we know that it really had to count on the amount of children staying in private education. And there was a pinch point. And if more than 9% moved, this would earn net zero. So that's why you were told, and I was told, according to Bridget Phillipson, that only 3,000 would move in a year. That's all they expected. That was another lie. Because their figures, their estimations were that 54,000 pupils would move, most within 2 years. Now, Bridget had said 3,000 in a year, 5,000 in a year, and there'd been estimations of 100,000 over 3 years, and this was debunked. No, that's not going to happen. Don't be ridiculous. You're just making that up. The government's own figures said 54,000 over 2 years. Now that is 9%. And what happens when you hit the 9%? You make net zero. So why didn't the government want you or me to know that? Well, it's simple, isn't it? If we knew that, if that was publicly acknowledged, we were publicly acknowledging, that's really hard to say with teeth like this, we were publicly acknowledging that this was never going to make any money. We know this. And yet we can't publicly acknowledge that, because if we do that, it goes against everything Rachel Reeves, Bridget Phillipson, Ellie Reeves, Keir Starmer has fought for, which is to abolish private schools. And to acknowledge that this wasn't revenue making, really, I mean, that was nice, but it wasn't the whole reason for it. Well, that's a disaster, because that's what they sold it to you on. That's what they sold the manifesto on. So then we move on to send pupils. Now, obviously, there's been the lobbyists, which is what Bridget calls them. I would prefer to say parents who care about their educational outcomes for their kids. They said this is desperately impacting different groups of the demographic at schools. And one in particular was send pupils. Now, in private school, you don't have to have an educational healthcare plan to get send support. So often parents get diagnoses. Often, I mean, it's important, if you are dyslexic, it's good to have a dyslexic diagnosis, the same with autism, the same with ADHD. And parents will go down that route, but they won't do it with the local authority because there is no requirement within the private system. In the state system, to get that level of support, you need to have an EHCP. And we can talk about that in another video, but the EHCPs are like gold dust. You don't get them. You have to, sell a kidney, lay your soul bare, give up every ounce of energy that you've ever had and put it into the EHCP system, which will then most likely end up in a tribunal, which you may or may not win, depending if the local authority turn up. It's a disaster. So parents in the private system don't do this. Now, there were calls to exempt children with SEND and exempting children without an EHCP. And if they'd done that, it would have cost £450 million from their net revenue, which would have made it unaffordable. So they didn't exempt send children because it wouldn't make them as much money. They knew the amount of send children in private education, because how else would they have come up with the £450 million loss in revenue? So they know that there's a big percentage of send children in the private sector, and they know that to exempt them would have cost them a significant amount of money. So they didn't. They threw them under the bus. They said, whatever. And they retained their £450 million. Well, that works apart from the fact that because they didn't exempt them, it was that percentage of children that was hit most hardest, because most of those parents are the ones that really are scraping everything they can to get together to get their kids in private school. So that system is now going into the state system. Well, the state system's knackered. The state system can't cope with it. So then you start to get the parents of the state system saying, well, we don't want them. So the government's own admission, just by its numbers, said, we know this is damaging and harming the most vulnerable in these schools, and we know how many there are, but we're going to carry on anyway. So they lied about that. Rachel Reeves was warned that preventing parents from paying school fees in advance to avoid the VAT was a retrospective move that could result in litigation. So she was warned that it would harm and damage vulnerable kids. She was told how many children would move and that it could make net zero if that happened. And she was told that it could end up in a court case. Now, in the court case, the claimants and Lord Panic have gone to court through crowdfunding. So you had the option, if you wanted to support that court case, you could put your hand in your pocket or you could not. With the government's court case, where they hired 4 KCs, who incidentally were all from private school, that court case is funded by you and me, the taxpayer. Now, we didn't get the choice as to whether we wanted to fund that, and we didn't get the choice as to how many KCs we wanted to fund. We are just funding a court case for the government to, in our eyes, defend the indefensible. But you didn't get told that you were going to do that. You didn't get asked if you were going to do that. So whilst we're scrabbling down the back of the sofa to see if we can give some pensioners some money to heat their houses, we have a budget that we can easily access to go to court to fight a case that's being brought by disabled children and children of faith schools to protect their education. Now, whatever the outcome, you can see that morally that's quite hard to swallow. We're spending money on defending a case that will penalise disabled children and children of faith schools, amongst all others, but these are the ones that went to court, so that's what we're talking about. Of course, if we were to talk about who this was affecting, then of course it gets a lot wider. The net goes further and further. So we've learned so much from this. We've learned that the government was told the trade-off was max revenue versus time to prepare. So the trade-off was you lose money by putting it in September 2025, but you give all schools, state schools and private schools, the opportunity to get ready, and the Treasury. I mean, let's not forget that HMRC is not set up to collect this tax. So let's not forget that we don't actually have the official systems in place to do this. So the onerous admin that the four KCs talk about, which would have been exempting send children, they said they wouldn't exempt send children, one of the reasons being it would be onerous admin. So they've just passed that on to the schools, the state schools and the private schools and the local authorities. I mean, the onerous admin with all the travel requests that we've been hearing about and how children are coming out of private, going into state and then having taxes to schools, and all the children that already have them anyway. I mean, that's onerous admin. And applying for an EHCP is onerous admin. I mean, you ask the schools that you've imposed this on what onerous admin is, and I think they'll give you a fairly eloquent response. So all of this is coming to light, and we're hearing the government laying bare, because they have to, what happened in the lead up to this. And it is basically, it's been shrouded, it's been hidden in the background for us not to know. We kind of did know, we've said it all along, and faced harsh criticism, may I say, and particularly from Bridget Phillipson. I mean, where the phrases was, I don't accept that. Well, you should, because your own department is saying it. When Bridget Phillipson was told how many children would move, she said, I don't accept that, knowing full well that it was in the government's own projection. So she lied. Now, we don't know how much exposure to all of this Bridget had. If I was going to be kind, I could say, well, do you know what? Maybe her and Rach hadn't had a conversation about it. Maybe it wasn't on the parliamentary WhatsApp group. Don't believe it for a second. Think it was. But we know that Rachel Reeves, we know that she had a full colour. We know that she knew how many children this was going to damage. She had the numbers right in front of her. She was warned against it by her own government. And that is the interesting bit. And when we have the government spouting all of these new policies, plans, and, you know, we're going to put 1,400 quid in your back pocket, blah, 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 blah. Well, would you believe a word they say after this? Would you, knowing that a government will cause known damage and destruction on the most vulnerable members of society, would you back that government now that you know everything? Even if you are the most stalwart Labour supporter, would you back them? I mean, they didn't have my vote. They will never get my vote. And may I say, if Reform or the Tories or the Greens had done this, they would never get my vote, or Lib Dems, sorry. It's not a thing. We have got people knowingly acting against children's best interests and against minority groups' best interests. Now that is huge. So regardless of where this court case, and also bear in mind, at the back of all of this, they're saying, well, it doesn't really matter what the outcome is because we're the government, we can do what we like, we don't have to listen, we can just ride, roughshod over it. Despite the fact that our Prime Minister was a leading human rights lawyer, barrister, he's saying, doesn't matter, we'll do what we want anyway. So that's a lot to take in, that's a lot to dissect, and it leaves you explode, or it leaves me exploding. I mean, the anger that invokes is palpable. But to all of those that said, you're making it up, it's not true, and obviously they're going to keep saying it, fine, do what you like, don't care. The truth was in the court case, and the admission was by the government. And that tells me all I need to know.